You're listening to Big World Network.
Skyfire, Episode 3, written and read by Arthur W. Johnson. I can't sleep at night. I am restless, toss and turn. I have a new friend, you see, who makes my heart burn. It was not often on the voyage that Seamus had time to think about the past, but it had been a slow day with the ship doing all the work in a trailing wind. He sat at the bow and gazed toward his destiny as his mind wandered back to when he met the woman he had so dearly loved. They had known each other as children, but there had been a gap in their teen years until that chance meeting as adults, a rift caused by his constant work on his father's farm. Seamus had rebelled, in his mind at least, when he reached his early teens, not against his father, whom he loved as well as any son could, but against the land. It seemed his town friends had plenty of time to play around and just be boys, so why couldn't he? They weren't working from sunrise to sunset, but he certainly was. He had stewed silently but did the work anyway. He was his father's son. When he was 16, Seamus had stopped rebelling. He had also stopped attending studies. He had given his life over to the farm and his father. He rarely saw his friends unless they stopped by to urge him to loaf with them, for which he no longer had the time nor the desire. He seldom saw anyone, in fact, and was rapidly forgetting and being forgotten outside the farm. By the time he was 19, he was married to the land in the care of his father, Fahey, king of potatoes, whose joints were so swollen he probably would never plow again. Thus, as Prince of Potatoes, he became the regent. He divided his days between the fields and repairs to keep the aged cottage he had grown to love from tumbling down around them. His father had taken over what he considered to be the wifely duties, such as cleaning and cooking. He could never do it as well as Lorna had. He didn't have her talent. Seamus constantly told him it was all right if it wasn't up to her standards, and that she could see from where she sat in heaven that he was ailing. Finally, in late spring, after all the planting was done and the chores were finished, Seamus said, "I think I'll go into Athlone for a change and maybe have a pint and a pie. Would you like to come along, Da?" "I think I'll just stay here and rest in the sun if you don't mind, son." "I understand. Can I bring you back anything from town?" "Nay, I have all I need, thank you, son." So off he took himself and hiked into Athlone, whistling as he went. He was so wrapped in the beauty of the day he wasn't paying attention when he rounded a corner and walked right into Patricia. "Aye, 'tis Seamus, as I vaguely recall," she said, as though it had been more than a few years since she had last seen him. "Aye, this is embarrassing," she said. "Are you hurt?" "Nay, what about you?" "I'm fine." He was stunned when the sun caught a glint of lavender in her eyes as she turned her head. She smiled at his expression and broke the spell when she said, "You've become something of a hermit out there on your father's farm." "Nay, just busy with the work. I'm taking some time off now that the crop is in the ground. I'm going to the Indoloch for a pint and a pie. Would you like to join me?" "I think I would. Besides, you owe me for all the times you pulled my braids when we were little." She laughed and took his arm, turning with him toward her Uncle Mike's pub down the street. "I suppose I do, don't I?" he said lightly. Seamus' step was suddenly a little lighter, as though the boots on his feet, muddy from the fields, had been replaced with dancing shoes. He realized the silliness of the thought and laughed inwardly at the idea of himself dancing. "What are you smiling about?" Patricia asked as she squinted up at him in the sunlight. He told her, and they both laughed. Then they looked at each other with a new realization. They both felt something they never had as children. It was a tingling sensation and an inner warmth, almost like a glow. There must have been an aura about them as they entered the pub, because conversation ceased and the four other occupants eyed them. Even Uncle Mike Darcy, who owned the pub, stared at them. They didn't notice as they sat down at a table near the window. They were so wrapped up in each other that they were startled when Mike stood over them and said, "What'll it be then?" "Oh, hello, Uncle Mike," Patricia said as she looked up. "What? Oh, could we have 2 pints and 2 pies, please?" Seamus managed to ask. As Mike turned away, Seamus whispered to Patricia, "I don't know what's come over me." "I believe I do. It has happened to me also." "What would that be?" "We have fallen in love." He looked at her in disbelief. "I've never been in love before." "Nor have I," she whispered. "It feels good, doesn't it?" "Oh, he replied bashfully. Whatever he was about to say was interrupted as Mike plunked down their order and said, "My customers generally come to the bar and collect their own food and drink, but I suppose I can serve royalty at their own table in your case." "I'm sorry, we got caught up in conversation." "Oh, I can see that," Mike snickered. "You and my niece look like a couple of lovebirds." Patricia reddened and lowered her gaze. Seamus stammered, "It's all right, lad." He smiled down at them. "But you missed my jests about royalty." "What do you mean?" Seamus asked. "After all, you are the Prince of Potatoes, aren't you, lad?" "Oh, aye," he said. "I've gotten so busy with work I've forgotten about that old jest." "'Tis no jest, lad. You should be proud of the title." "Oh, but I am." "Enjoy your lunch," Mike smiled as he turned away. They spoke of many things that had transpired over the past few years. "And Da's arthritis has gotten so bad he can't do very much anymore. Now the thatching of the roof needs mending. I've never done that, and I'm not sure how to go about it." "Let me tell my father," Patricia said. "He's the best thatcher around Athlone, you know." I had forgotten, but yes, I did know. "I'll do the work if he will just show me what to do." "I'll tell him as soon as I see him." "Perhaps I should call on him and ask his permission to see you before we continue to meet each other." "That is the proper thing to do," she said encouragingly. She glanced at those staring from the bar and added, "The rumors are about to begin as it is." "Then I shall walk you home and ask him now. Lord knows I want to do things the right way around." They rose from the table and Seamus went to the bar to pay for their meal, but Mike refused to accept his money. "It's on the house today. After all, she is my niece," he said with a nod toward Patricia, who was waiting by the door. They walked not quite hand in hand, for that would not have been proper on a first outing, but close enough that the backs of their hands occasionally brushed together, sending tingling sensations up both their spines. The new feelings were enjoyable, and they played them for all they were worth. Arrived at Darcy's cottage, Patricia called out to her father, but he did not respond. "He must be repairing someone's roof. Would you care to come in and wait for him?" "We shouldn't be here alone together. Someone may stop by, and then the rumors would really fly." "I suppose you're right." She looked up and down the lane, and when she saw no one was in sight, she held both his cheeks in her hands and kissed him full on the mouth before dashing inside and closing the door. He stood there stunned by the unexpected kiss, not knowing whether to go in after her or go home. Discretion finally won, and he turned around toward the realm of the potato with a new lightness in his step. As he approached their cottage, he saw his father sitting on the bench with his head leaning against the warm stucco wall. He turned his head as Seamus scuffed some pebbles in the road. "How was your pint and pie then, lad?" he asked as Seamus sat down and leaned against the wall. "It was fine," he said with a contented sigh, "but it was the company that made it so, Da." Fahey smiled knowingly as he tilted his head forward. "Who is she then, lad?" "Is it that obvious?" As Fahey nodded, Seamus rocked forward, laced his fingers together and rested his elbows on his knees. "Do you remember Patricia Darcy, the little girl whose sleek black hair I was in trouble for pulling?" "Aye, I do. I ran into her on the way into town." "Literally." Seamus paused for effect. "We shared a pint and a pie at the end of Loch, but we shared more than that, Da. We have fallen in love." Fahey smiled again and leaned his head back against the wall. "I knew the day wasn't far off when you would take your final step as a boy and become a man." After a pause, he turned his head toward his son. "What does John Darcy say about it then?" "He wasn't at home, so I wasn't able to speak with him, but I will ask him if I can call on her. You're doing the right thing, lad. She is so beautiful, Da. I know how you feel about her. It's how I felt about your mem from the day we discovered each other until the day she died. I still feel that way, and I look forward to the day I will see her again. Oh, Da, don't get morbid. I'm not being morbid, lad. When you get old and tired, you look forward to that which you miss the most. So tell me about Patricia, he said. You're changing the subject. Aye. They sat in the sun until it was ready to set, and Seamus poured out his newly found feelings to his father. They discussed the correct customs of courting for the sake of their neighbor's sensibilities and propriety. Finally, as the chill of the evening fell, they went inside for the night. The morning sun was just breaking over the horizon as Seamus and Fahey were sitting down to breakfast. Seamus got out of his chair to answer the knock at the door. "Oh, Mr. Darcy, won't you come in and join us for breakfast?" Seamus said. "Nay, lad," he said as he removed his cap from his balding head. "Patricia fed me well this morning, but I will have a cup of that fine-smelling coffee." Fahey had risen and offered a gnarled hand. "Good morning, John." "A fine good morning to you, Fahey," he said as he offered his own calloused hand. "'Twill be the third day of sunshine in a row. I can't last too long for my old bones," he groaned. "I feel the same. What brings you out so early?" Fahey asked. Seamus feared he had misstepped and Mr. Darcy was calling about his daughter's welfare. As John sat his lithe bird-like frame on the chair, Seamus interrupted. "I forgot to tell you, Da, Mr. Darcy is going to teach me how to mend their thatch." "At least Patricia said she would ask him," he said hopefully as he set a full cup in front of Patricia's father. "Aye, she did, lad. She couldn't stop talking about you last night after I got home," he said with a smile and a wink. Seamus' face colored as he sat down. He cleared his suddenly clogged throat and asked, "Would you mind if I called upon her, sir?" "I would deem it an honor, lad." Thank you, Seamus said in obvious relief. "I was afraid you would say no." "Why would you think that?" "Some people think of us," he nodded toward his father, "as dirt farmers." "I find what you do as noble as thatching, and you," he also nodded to include Fahey, "are the most noble. After all, what do people call the two of you?" "You referring to the king and the prince of potatoes," Seamus interjected, and John Darcy nodded in agreement. "We appreciate that," Fahey interjected. He looked at Seamus and he asked, "How are you going to pay for Mr. Darcy?" Seamus turned back to John Darcy. "If you will trust us for it, we will have the money in the fall when we harvest the potatoes." "That will be fine, lad. I trust you." "Thank you. You are very generous, sir." He paused for a moment and then asked, "What tools do I need for the roof?" "I've brought enough for the both of us. After you finish your breakfast, we'll get started." Seamus learned the fine art of thatching on a warm spring day in the year of 1831 and enjoyed the company of his future father-in-law. Fahey fed them lunch, and by nightfall they had become fast friends as they finished the job. Seamus was glad that the potatoes grew on their own without his help. He would occasionally hoe out a few weeds and take care of the chores that needed doing, but over the next few months he seemed to find more free time than he had ever had for his boyhood friends. He often found himself at the Darcy cottage, escorting Patricia here and there and being seen together as young couples were meant to do universally. They often walked for miles in the countryside, admiring the flowers at the various cottage doors or the young lambs and calves cavorting in the pastures. Their favorite haunt became the banks of the River Shannon. They had found a willow that hung out over the water where they could sit for hours talking about the future. When no one was looking, they would dart out of their secret place and go to the pub for lunch before returning to their respective chores. They managed to spend a great deal of time together, and life had become as idyllic as either of them could have hoped. The summer was passing quickly with so much to do when they were apart. Patricia had shown tomboy tendencies all her life, probably because her mother had died when she was 10 years old. She lacked a feminine touch in her upbringing. More than once her father had apologized for not being able to guide her in that area. She would come in from play with a skinned knee that she had not noticed, and he would worry over her and wish he could provide a mother's touch. "It's all right, Da," she would tell him. "I'm big enough to take care of myself now. I don't need a mother to dote over me." She grew to the ripe age of 19 with an occasional feminine insight from a female cousin or an aunt, and didn't feel that she was lacking any of the knowledge she needed. By the time she fell in love for the first time, she had come to believe that she would be a spinster and was groping for all the information she had never been given regarding relationships between the sexes. Of course, there were some things that were only discussed between mother and daughter that she would never learn from an aunt or a cousin. There were times when she felt cheated by her mother's untimely death, but she had determination within her and would never let that stop her. Suddenly, Seamus was the most important person in her life. She would figure out what she had to do to make him happy. She had confessed these facts to him on one of their outings and been surprised that he showed no concern over her lack of knowledge or experience. "I don't know any of that either," he replied, "so we'll learn all about it together, won't we?" Seamus thought they were off to a good start. Their long discussions under the willow by the river were an excellent beginning. He admired her spunk and her quickness. Patricia had a way of looking at things logically and coming out with the right solution every time. He liked that about her. Back in present day, the waves grew larger and the snow's bow began to rise and fall in the troughs, shaking Seamus out of his reverie. He held on to the railing and rode with the movement, enjoying it like a child riding up and down hills in a cart, the wind a constant on the back of his head.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to Big World Network.